Welcome back to the Conquest of Abyssinia series. Imam Ahmad was on a mission to unite the Muslims across the region, as they were disunited. A big portion was the Somalis. A portion within the Somalis was a tribe named Habr Maqdi, from which the Imam had demanded tax from. They refused to pay it, resorting to banditry on the roads and acting evilly towards the country. The Imam at the time set out for a locality known as Ra'bud, which was between the country of the Abyssinians and the Muslims, with the intention of marching into Abyssinia itself. But he then doubled back towards the country of the Somali evildoers. The Somalis were routed and the Imam followed them to the Red Sea, which was a day's march. He plundered their territory and devastated it. He then turned around and went back. However, not all the Somalis from the same tribe Habr Maqdi rebelled. A lot joined forces with the Imam, and amongst them was Sultan Uray Abboon. The Imam had previously sent letters to the chieftains of each tribe within the Somalis to make peace and unite each other for the sake of Allah and jihad. Amongst these chiefs was the previously mentioned Hirabu from the tribe of Marayhan. Upon hearing of the Imam's activities and jihad on the Abyssinian territory, he himself wanted to confirm this and had arrived halfway along the route to Harar. After verifying the Imam's departure, he doubled back and returned to his own country. The chronicler continues, he, the Imam, sent out messages to more Somali tribes and other non-Somali tribes as well. He sent them some of the looted Abyssinian booty and wrote them a letter in which he goaded them onto jihad and commanded them to respond out of obedience to the omniscient king. He also wrote down the saying of the Most High Allah, "Go forth lightly or heavily laden and carry out the jihad for the sake of Allah with your property and your persons." He said in the course of this, "Whoever aids the religion of Allah, Allah will aid him, and whoever feels he can do without this, then Allah will do without him." He then dispatched 3 persons with the letters and waited to see what their replies would be. Among those whom he dispatched was Ali Goita bin Adruh. His father was one of the courageous heroes who died a martyr in Bali. May God Most High have mercy upon him. This was in the days of the Sultan Muhammad. The Imam sent Ali to one of the Somali tribes named Yabarri. He also sent another messenger to the tribe of Girri, whose leader and chieftain was Mahattan bin Uthman bin Khalid. His brother-in-law was one of the heroic and gracious knights who died a martyr in the Battle of Amba, as will be recalled later on. He also sent another messenger to the outlying provinces to spur them on for jihad for God and in the way of the Most High. The first to respond was Habr Maqdi. They reached Harar with their chieftain Ahmed Girri bin Hussein. They encamped in a place called Qasa in the heights above the valley of Harar. They showed off their equipment and their weaponry and paraded their horses. The chronicler goes on to say, "They were knights, and what knights, and they were foot soldiers, and what foot soldiers they were." They met the Imam face to face and he welcomed them with the warmest of welcomes. He gave them gifts and provisions and treated them graciously, garbing their chieftain Ahmed Girri in particularly exquisite clothing. After them the tribe of Girri came. Their chieftain was Mahattan bin Uthman. They also showed off their weaponry and armor, parading their horses, and had their bows slung slash-like over their shoulders, as they also greeted the Imam face to face. The chieftain brought with him his wife, Firdausa, the sister of the Imam Ahmed. The chronicler goes on, Imam Ahmed's closest companions were a cavalry chieftain named Amir Hussein al-Gatturi, lord of Dawaro after it was conquered later on. Another was Amir Zaharboui Muhammad, who was the cousin of the Imam Ahmad. He had been captured during the expedition against Dawaro, a war which we had previously mentioned in the last video, who was then sent to the king of Abyssinia, Wanag Sagad. The Imam sent a messenger to the king Lebna Dengal, who said to the king, "This prisoner you have is my cousin. We will send you money for his ransom." When the king heard that he was the Imam's cousin, he had him sent off to a distant part of the land of Abyssinia called Damot. This was just how God wanted it, so that his Muslim servants shall be saved from the idol worshippers. Allah rescued him by his miraculous power, to the extent that he escaped from the prison and his bonds. Upon his escape, he then would walk determinedly by night, while by day he would hide himself, remaining alone in the deserts and wastelands until he finally reached the country of the Muslims. 4 months before the battle of Sembere Kure, he was present at the battle of Sembere Kure and at other expeditions, and his was an authentic jihad. He was one of the courageous ones, generous, powerful and intrepid, as will be described later in detail. Another companion of the Imam was Qusam Abu Bakr, a devout worshipper of God, a mujahid. He died a martyr in Dawwaro, as will be described later on. Garad Ahmusu bin Ahmed, another trusted companion of the Imam, a notable hero and exterminator on horseback. And Garad Abd al-Nasir, Lord of Guns, after the conquest, one of the pious mujahideen and one of the courageous and renowned ones. He sacrificed his blood, zealous for the way of the Most High God. He was one of the members of the household of the Imam, their servant, who gave him good counsel in all matters. Another, Sabr ad-Din, a fearless horseman who, if ever he saw an infidel, could not control himself until he had seized him. He was like a camel in heat. Blood flowed from his nose, so infuriated did he become for God, and so deep was his longing for jihad in the way of God. Another was Faharsam Sultan bin Ali from the tribe of Yamli, and his companion Nur bin Nasir bin Ali. Garad Siddiq bin Ali was another of the Imam's companions who governed Sharman after the conquest, which will be recalled later also. Another was Faharsam Din. He had been close to the Hatti and was a Muslim who preserved his religion after the eventual death of the Imam Ahmed in the future. He then went with the Amir Nur, son of the Wazir Mujahid, to the country of the Muslims, the city of Harar, and died there. May God have mercy upon him. He governed Laqaya. Another companion of the Imam was Al-Uray Ahmad bin Abd al-Wahid, also the Amir Abu Bakr, nicknamed Qattin, which means the Gaunt. He was from among those renowned for their courage and among the rare horsemen whose exploits became proverbial. Others included Goita bin Adam, the Wazir ad-Doli, and Jasa Umar, who after the conquest governed the land of Wallaka on the border of the Abay, which is a mighty river that menders and empties itself into the Egyptian Nile. Another was Takla bin Agaw and Ahmed Din bin Khalid bin Hargaya Muhammad. Garad Uthman bin Juhar, governor of Janzalaq after the conquest, and Al-Uray Abboon bin Uthman bin Sulaiman bin Sultan Muhammad bin Badlay from the line of Sa'd ad-Din himself. And lastly, Basara bin Jasu, who died a martyr in the Battle of Maya, as will be recalled later on. All of the soldiers that followed the previously mentioned companions had killed 100 infidels or more already. They were all courageous heroes and close companions of the Imam. After the Somali alliance, the Imam made preparations for a jihad into Abyssinia, after assembling his troops and Somalis with their leader Hirabu, who then set out under the Imam's command. They arrived with him at a place called Waduh Meseg, in between the country of Fatagar, meeting no resistance. There was no fighting. Between the Muslims and the king of Abyssinia, Lebna Dengel, was a day and a half's march, so the Muslims deliberated amongst themselves about going on further. The Imam and a group of the Emirs advised the following: "Let us march out and take the king unawares. One of the two good things will happen, either success with its reward of booty, or martyrdom in the way of God and paradise by the grace of God." But the majority of the army said, "Let us go back to our country from here." So the Muslims took a great quantity of booty and headed back. The chronicler informs, the Imam was desolated and wept bitter tears until his eyes were bloodshot from the excessive weeping at their returning and disagreeableness. Upon returning to Harar, the land of Sa'd ad-Din, the Imam could not rest until he had tied a standard to a spear and entrusted it to the Emir Mansur bin Mahfuz al-Qatturi. He gave him 100 knights and more than 2,000 infantry. He commanded him to march into the land of Abyssinia to the city named Kaigi. So the Emir Mansur set out and arrived at Kaigi, meeting no resistance, he amassed vast booty and returned back to their country. The Imam then tied another banner to a spear and entrusted this one to the Wazir ad-Dawli, and attached to him 500 knights and 100 infantry. Well equipped for war and for battle, he ordered them to march to the land of Dawaro, to a place called Wambarih. So they set off for it, and they also met no resistance. They also took a lot of booty and turned around, heading back to the land of the Muslims. Meantime, while he was returning home along the route, the people of Dawaro met him with their infantry, their patricians and their cavalry. They confronted the Wazir ad-Dawli at a place called Zamit. Cavalry confronted cavalry, hero confronted hero. One of their patricians, Arba Samal, by name, was a giant, and their cavalry and infantry could not be counted. The chronicler informs, battle was joined between them. They struck with their swords and stabbed them with their spears until their spears shattered, and their forearms were numb from striking the necks and heads of the Abyssinians. Then one of the Muslims by the name of Nur attacked one of the patricians and struck him on his neck, so that he fell off his horse and onto the ground. Then the fray grew more savage and the fighting more brutal. The Muslims fought a deadly battle, raising their voice in the battle cry, "There is no God but Allah, and Allah is the greatest." The Abyssinians turned tail and the Muslims attacked them with sword blows and pike thrusts, killing an uncountable number of them. There was not a single death from amongst the Muslims. Wazir ad-Dawli then turned back to the country of the Muslims, flushed with victory and laden with booty. Then the Imam Ahmad bin Ibrahim made preparations for a military expedition against the country of Abyssinia, forming a force made up of his valiant leaders and heroes. He tied a red banner to a spear and entrusted it to the Emir Hussein al-Gatturi, to whom he detached 100 from amongst his warriors and fighters. Then tying another banner, this time white, to the Wazir Nur, to whom he gave more than 100 knights also. The chronicler continues, "In those days the banner of the Imam was yellow, and under it were 200 knights chosen from amongst the courageous and heroic fighters. Skilled in the cut and thrust of war, they were fighters of excellence. There were 7,000 infantry placed under the command of 5 soldiers. One of them was called Naqdiya. At the time he was a Muslim, but he later apostatized. May God save us from that. He was an infidel when he was killed. The second was Abd al-Karim bin Uthman, known as Dawaro. The name of the third was Umar bin Abdullah. The fourth was Uthman bin Abdullah from the people of Sim, and the fifth's name was Muhammad. All of these had converted to Islam. The Imam Ahmed set his forces in order, cautioning that there was no retreating, and then set out with his tremendous army of knights and heroes, each of whom had previously met in battle against at least 100 Abyssinians each. He launched his expedition and they went on until they reached a place called Zamir Din in the territory of the Muslims, which had a section that belonged to the Abyssinians. The cavalry and infantry made ready for battle. There was a discussion amongst them first about what course to follow. It was unanimously decided that they were to attack Dawaro. The chronicler informs, Abu Bakr bin Ismail told me that he took part in the battle of those days, and that they set out for a place called Kahar al-Bari in the vicinity of Dawaro. There they battled some infidel infantrymen who had assembled in a narrow defile hemming in the Muslims who were fighting there. The Muslims eventually were victorious with the help of the Most High God. The infidels fled after a group of them was killed. There was a church there named Zaharak, belonging to the ancient Abyssinian kings. The Muslims set fire to it, then turned back seeking to return to their own country. However, the infidels had an encampment at a place called Qub, between the country of the Muslims and their own. The Muslims discussed amongst themselves what to do. Some of them said, "Let's return to the country of the Muslims," and others said, "Let us go back towards the country of the infidels." Some of the Muslims fled by night without the Imam's knowledge, seeking to return to their own country. The Imam set off after them, overtook some of them and brought them back by force. When the army reached Qub, they said to the Imam, we will not accompany you to Abyssinia unless your wife Delwambara returns to the country of the Muslims. She shall not come with us to the land of the infidels. Not one of the emirs before you ever took his wife with him on military expeditions, only you." His wife Delwambara replied, "I will not go back." So her husband took her as far as Ifat, into the land of the Abyssinians. Organizing his army and his forces, he left by night for Abyssinia, finally reaching the Awash, which had a mighty flowing river that mended through many different countries. In autumn, it was impossible to cross it except on timber that had cowhide tied underneath it like a boat. Their name for this is Lakka. The river goes from Damot until it peters out into the Salt Sea in the vicinity of Zayla. The Muslims then deliberated amongst themselves about the booty, because they had entered the land of the Waro, and agreed amongst themselves that whatever booty that was looted would be divided equally among the army. However, while some of them had taken plunder, others had not, because earlier opposition to the war itself on the part of some of them. So when the Muslims reached the Awash river, they brought up the matter of the booty. They had declared, "We will not take any more booty. We will not take anything, and what booty we have taken belongs to the Most High God, all of it. But if anybody does take booty, then from now on it will belong to him." The Imam sought advice from Garaddin of the Sagara tribe. His advice was, "Do such and such." Then the Imam announced to the army the following: "After the fifth part has been taken out, then whatever booty someone takes will belong to him." The Imam organized his soldiers, dividing the army into 3 units. In charge of the first unit was the Wazir ad-Dawli, a person of good counsel, wisdom and foresight, whom he ordered to pass the territory of Ifat on the right flank. In charge of the second unit was the Wazir Nur bin Ibrahim, whom he had ordered to pass by Ifat on the left flank. The Imam himself was in charge of the third unit, and with him was the glorious cavalry and noble heroes. He took the middle position between both flanks. The chronicler continues, "As for what happened to the unit under the command of Wazir ad-Dawli, it was marching on the right flank, oblivious of the infidels that were there. As he followed the road, suddenly he came upon tents pitched, which the infidels' army and their patricians were all within them. The leader of the patricians was called Wanakjan, which means the king's lion in their language. Wanak was well known as the governor of Ifat. He was one of their courageous ones. The Muslims did not delay long in attacking them, and they fought a heated battle at first light. One of the Muslim knights from the people of Dawaro, who was called Faharsam Satut, he had been a Christian but had gone down from the Abyssinian country to that of the Muslims, submitting to Islam with a conversion that was genuine and of sterling quality. He was one of the rare breed of horsemen renowned for his bravery, slim of body, but he was a fighter for the territory of Islam. He straightaway attacked the accursed patrician Wanakjan and struck him a blow that unseated him and threw him to the ground, and he cast his spirit to hell, an evil place to settle in. The Abyssinians were routed and fled, a great number of them killed, all their belongings and tents plundered by the Muslims. As for their horses and mules and weapons and livestock, they were taken and were innumerable. Along with their belongings, they also captured their women. Among them was the daughter of the maternal aunt of the king Wanak Sagad bin Na'ud bin Admas bin Zara'a Yaqub, whom the Imam gave to the Wazir ad-Dawli, who sent her back to the country of the Muslims. The king of Abyssinia paid a ransom of 50 ounces of red gold for her. The army unit that the Imam commanded headed straight for Antokia, a place where the king sometimes would reside. The guide for the Muslims on the road was a certain person called Simu, known as Sakara. He was at the time a Muslim, but afterwards he apostatized and became a Christian. He seized 2 Abyssinians and made them stand in the presence of the Imam, who interrogated the 2 of them about the Abyssinians. They replied, "We only know about the patrician Wanakjan, that he followed the route of the Wazir ad-Dawli. In Antokia, there was a Christian church which the great emirs of the Muslims entered. The Emir Hussein bin Abu Bakr al-Qatturi, the governor of Dawaro after the invasion, the Emir Ali, governor of Angot after the conquest, Garad Ahmus and Qusam Abu Bakr, the Sheikh Hamad, son of the Honorable the Sheikh Wasara. The Imam himself entered, as did his wife Dalwambara, the daughter of the Amir Mahfuz. When they could not find any treasure in it, they set fire to it and destroyed it. In the meantime, a messenger from the Wazir ad-Dawli arrived, gladdening them with the news of his victorious conquest and booty and the killing of the patrician Wanakjan. The army that was commanded by Wazir Nur passed to the left of the land of Antokia and plundered it before returning to the Imam. The Wazir ad-Dawli did the same with the Muslims assembling in Antokia. The Imam pitched a white tent in the area of Antokia, which was a part of the territory of Ifat in the land of Abyssinia. When it was time for the afternoon prayer, the Muslims saw the Abyssinians' vanguard close by them. The Imam galloped after them, accompanied by a troop of horsemen, leaving the camp as it stood. The Abyssinians took flight and one of their number was killed. He was killed by Al-Qussam Abu Bakr, who that day was mounted on a horse. He dismounted and killed him. The Imam and his companions then turned back and returned to the camp. On the fourth day of encampment, the Imam set out for the city of Bello with the Emir Ahmus as his guide, riding with the vanguard carrying the red standard. They marched all day along a narrow route uphill, with men and animals becoming exhausted on that day. On account of the narrowness of the path, men had to carry the Imam's wife Dalwambara on their shoulders. At sunset, the tent of the Imam was pitched in a place called Dak, where qat grew in abundance. The night had already lengthened when the Imam Ahmed arrived with the rear guard and the last of the army at the tent and the encampment. They were so tired from the harshness of the route that they went to sleep without eating anything. They were so tired. Upon reaching Bello, as it was ruled by the king of Abyssinia, it had Muslims living within the city and had to pay poll tax to the king. They came to the Imam Ahmed, his army, the sheikhs and the Quranic teachers, and honored them with gifts. They were merchants, the people of the villages, so much honoring that they gifted 20 ounces of gold and said to the Imam, "We will give this gold to your wife Dalwambara." The Imam resisted, saying, "This is for the conducting of jihad." The emirs tried to talk him around, but he again resisted their efforts. They were the Emir Hussein al-Qatturi, the Wazir ad-Dawli, Garaddin and Amir Ali. He refused to allow the gold to be given to his wife and got the better of them in this matter. He said to them, "It is not permissible to give this to her. This is to help Islam. I won't give her any of it. I will spend it on jihad. May God forgive him." So he sent the gold to the Sharif Muhammad al-Sattari and purchased 100 swords with which he gave witness at the battle of Sembere, Kure. This was to help the Muslims later on, as will be mentioned if God wills. The Imam intercepted some of the Abyssinian traders in Bello who had in their possession valuables belonging to the king of Abyssinia. He killed them in the middle of the town and took their valuables, their mules and their hacks along with their loads. The Imam stayed with his army for 2 days in Bello. They then set out for the country of the Muslims, taking with them the treasure of the king of Abyssinia. They spent the night by the Awash river, then set out again. This time their guide took them off the beaten track into rocky and heavily wooded territory. The Imam questioned the guide about the route and he replied, "This used to be the best track, but now it has been overgrown through to little use." They had not travelled very far when they found themselves in the midst of the forest, with trees growing together, closely entangled in one another, and because of the trees they lost their way. They discussed amongst themselves what to do and asked the guide, "How can we get back to the road?" To which the guide replied, "If I had taken you by the top road, it would have been long and there would have been no water and the journey would have taken an extra day." The Muslims became more bewildered and their moaning and groaning redoubled. The Imam then commanded his troops, "Get to work on the trees with your swords." The trees were enormous. The army followed his advice and hacked away at the trees with their swords from the forenoon prayer time until the sun sank into the west and eventually broke through to a wide road. The chronicler Shihab continues, when the Imam advised the troops to hack their way through the forest with their swords, they were exhausted. They said, "We have been battling infidels and now we are compelled to battle the forest." But when they hacked their way through the forest and arrived at the open road, they were amazed and thanked God and the Imam as well for his advice. On the third day, at morning prayer time, they arrived at a place called Qub, where there was a mighty river. They had hardly had time to halt before a cloud of dust swirled up behind them, filling the sky so that they could not see the mountains or trees for the amount of dust. The Muslims thought that a troop of Abyssinians were pursuing them, so the Imam organized his forces, trooped up the cavalry, readied their equipment for battle, and then mounted. The Wazir ad-Dawli approached the Imam and said, "Don't go yourself. Let us go and spare you the trouble, and we'll seek out information." The Imam replied, "Why should I not go? I'm a God-fearing man. However, I will follow the example of other God-fearing men. What should be done is plain enough." So then the Imam sent horsemen off to bring news back to him. These horsemen returned and said, "This dust cloud is not caused by a troop of infidels, but by the tramping of herds of elephants and wild antelopes." After this, the Muslims went back on their journey until they came to Dir, on the border of the Muslim territory. Before the Imam pitched the white tent and brought out the fifth part of the booty, even to the very thread and needle. And the fifth part comprised 500 head of slaves, 1,000 head of livestock, and a vast number of mules. The Imam, victorious, his status enhanced, and exceedingly happy, he then entered his city of Harar, where he divided the fifth part amongst the 8 categories that the Most High God described in his illustrious book. The king of Abyssinia, Sagad bin Na'ud, had dispatched traders into the country of the Muslims carrying gold, ivory, cats and slaves, which was a vast quantity of wealth that belonged to the king. They had sold their merchandise in the country of the Muslims and crossed the Red Sea to As-Sihr and Aden. Then they turned back and returned, seeking their own country and the presence of the king. The Imam got to know about them, stole their wealth, which then became booty for the Muslims. They divided it amongst the tribes for the sake of jihad in the way of God. They were strengthened by this wealth against the Abyssinians. The Imam's cry went up for the commencement of the march into Abyssinia. He set out with his soldiers, the tribes coming one after the other, the banners following one another. The Imam set out with his wife Delwambara. She was pregnant. They reached a town called Zifa, where they found food and good things in abundance. They were met by Garaddin bin Adam, a man of peace who loved the poor and the unfortunate, and who frequently called on the name of the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him salvation. He treated them graciously, and as did Garad Sama'un and Garad Kamal, the brother-in-law of the Imam, to whose sister Munisa was the daughter of Uthman, and also the Amir Mujahid greeted them. They paid homage to the Imam and his army, as did Absa Manur. All of them greatly honored the Imam. The army camped there for 6 days in Zifa. The Imam Ahmad's wife Delwambara gave birth in Zifa and bore a boy who was named Muhammad. Delwambara deferred going on the expedition on account of this and stayed with the Imam's sister Munisa. Thereupon the Muslims set out for Abyssinia. They reached Dir. They joined forces there, the Muslims and the heroes who professed the unity of God, small and great alike.